Plug and Alley presents Working in Music Sucks, the show where we talk about what sucks about working in music so you don't have the same problems. I'm your host, John Maciel, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, and that's internships. And are internships actually dead in the music industry? And it kind of depends on which part of the industry we're talking about here and what you're looking at. So I started off as an intern for 2 different studios before I got my 3rd internship. And each internship experience was kind of different. And I think it's kind of like any job, essentially, where you don't know what you want out of a job until you experience things that you know you don't want out of the job, right? And this episode, really hoping that my my nightmare scenario stories that I went through really help you in figuring out, is the type of internship that you want actually still alive and present, or is it one of the dead ones? And when it comes to like the recording world in internships, what's typical is, people will say whatever you got to say to get in the studio and clean toilets and scrub bathrooms. Like the free labor does not equate to getting an education. And ultimately with the internship, what you want to get out of it is an education. Now, a lot of facilities and a lot of studios and a lot of producers, they run what I call intern meals. And essentially, they have a project that's like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, something that's a short duration of time, and they know they need help. So what they do is they reach out to individuals who just are ecstatic and excited to have an opportunity, and they'll do anything just for the opportunity. But in reality, it's not an opportunity. It's an exchange for being in a place for free labor, just to like clean studios or help build a studio or be a runner on a project with the illusion of, gaining hands-on studio experience, which often in these situations does not occur. And unfortunately, a lot of studios that I've encountered on my journey do these type of things, these practices that I don't believe in. And I think it's really keep an eye on like how often interns turn into engineers or people who work out of that studio. Is it a one-man shop situation? And the reason you want to know this stuff is because you want to know going in, is this going to be the type of intern situation where I'm actually going to learn? Because as valuable as their time is, your time is just as valuable, if not more, because you have a world of opportunities where they're stuck as a producer or a studio having to pay bills to get things done, where you're in an opportune situation to pivot or shift if you want to. So you really asking yourself, like, is this an internship that's going to lead to something? Or is this just, I can brag about on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and shit that I got to hang out at this studio, and you actually aren't doing anything and your career is not moving forward. And in 6 to 9 months, you're in your bedroom posting pictures of like a plugin. And I'm not saying this to like be an ass, but the reality is I see this so often, so many times, where people fall in these situations, and it breaks my heart, because I have friends who have been in situations like this, and I've kind of been in similar situations where I was an intern disguised as an assistant, but didn't really do anything, and I wasn't being really taught anything. And it wasn't until 3 months in, I was like, what am I doing? Like, I had the epiphany of like, wait, I'm not really getting anything out of the situation. They're getting a lot out of the situation, but I'm not getting essentially what I wanted. And because it was like a one-man shop situation, it was like I can never use the gear. I can never use a studio. It was just a very like rough situation, essentially. And I mean, it was cool for, the first month, but then after that, it wasn't turning into what it needed to be. And then the other internship that I had, that one was a little bit better. I was, able to use the facilities here and there, get some hands-on experience, but ultimately it wasn't anything leading towards anything. And I had to make the decision of like, all right, I got to also leave this opportunity. And, one did treat me better than the other. And both experiences did teach me a lot of, what not to do and what to do. One was a bigger studio situation. So that one was cool because I actually got to see what it's like to run like a studio facility. And I've always been obsessed with like systems and operations. Unfortunately, it's like the dorky things. And I think being a mixer, it's like you're obsessed with like, how do I optimize this mix to like get me to the point to where I can just like focus on what needs to be done. Like, how can I make the EQ knobs do what I want with just thinking it? Like, if we ever get to that point in mixing, man, it's over. Because I know so many of us be like, suit me up to the Matrix machine, and I'm going to get this mix done in 10 minutes because my brain's just going to tell this machine how to do it. But those internships were ultimately, I didn't ask the right questions when I started, which was something I learned. Like, how often do people stay in internships? Do they end up becoming assistant engineers or given a permanent rate discount to bring in their own clients? Are they able to record their own clients after hours when, the schedule's not busy? Just really figuring out what happens to other people in my situation if I'm coming into this one. And seeing if there's anyone else in the studio who is, formerly an intern, and asking them firsthand experience, like getting a feel for them. What was it like for you? These are important things to ask because for the most part, very few studio internships are actually paid out there now. They're all unpaid. And from what I've seen from my own eyes, from witnessing friends and other people just aren't looking for interns anymore. There's so many programs and automations happening now that it's kind of like, why bring in an intern when I can just hire someone with some experience and they just like kind of do what I need them to do and everything else is dialed in. So like bookkeeping's dialed in, scheduling's dialed in with like calendar systems, programs like, it's not called ScreenFlow, but it's called something where like macros to make systems just automate and do so many things faster. And, with the emergence of a lot of records literally being done with MIDI now, it's like the mixer gets sent these MIDI files and essentially is picking the sounds. It's like you don't need an intern to help you record a lot of bands because it's like, well, it's just, if you're a producer, a lot of it's like, oh yeah, well, we're going to do MIDI drums and you record DIs and vocals and then send that off to the mixers. What do you need an intern around for? So it's just really tough. And especially after COVID, a lot of the big studios just never opened back up again. And I know friends in LA who are just like, yeah, work's going great, but it's not like it used to be. It's not as the bigger projects aren't really happening like they were, which is unfortunate and it sucks, but it's when an entire economy shuts down for that long and bands on average aren't like, they don't have all the wealth by all means. It's very difficult for them to, spend a certain amount of record on a budget. Labels were in the same situation. So labels were already pretty tight on budgets. And now it's just, they have to really justify that record's going to land because they can't afford for it not to land. Because if they book tours and things of that nature, are people even going to show up or is it going to get canceled and things of that nature? So where there was opportunity for studio time is kind of gone. So the age of the intern, I feel, is slowly dying. But the caveat to that is access to people online and opportunities online is so much better than it used to be. You just have to be an individual who's able to, you're a great communicator. You're able to figure out things and problem solve on your own. It's kind of like, instead of being an intern, you're asked to be an assistant engineer virtually, and you have to learn and teach yourself how to do that. And I think a great way to start is finding producers on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter who post like, need a remote engineer to like edit these vocals, and getting an opportunity to become like an editor, a remote go-to person essentially. And that person that, they can kind of mentor from afar on their own dime for the ones that want to do it. That's kind of where I see things going. I see a lot of my friends working with virtual mentors essentially, or buying some sort of program, which I have a whole other episode listed to opinions on like audio programs, because I've seen them all, I've watched them all, and I've worked for a few companies that do them, and I have my opinions on what's actually working and what's not working. And when it comes to the internships, I'm not saying they're gone forever. Like you might be in a town where like, well, the studio here for sure, like still does interns. That's great. You're actually in a really good situation. Now you need to ask yourself, are they going to be the right mentors for you? Is it going to be a great opportunity for you to actually get what you want out? Because it can't just all be on the plus side for them. It has to be like at least a little bit on the plus side for you too. Not just being there is enough. Not just being in the studio when a client comes through is enough. You need to really ask yourself, like, is this a situation where in 6 months I can be, I'll have clients to bring in? Because you also have to be honest with yourself. It's like they're not going to give you work. They're going to ask you for help on the work, but they're not giving you work. So as an intern, you need to watch and navigate to see how things are happening in that facility or with that studio, and then have the awareness of, am I going to be able to have people ready to come into the studio and pay the studio price or my rate for using the studio after hours? Or am I going to have a pipeline? Because if I'm just coming to show up and hope that they're going to hire me, it's very rare studio engineers get hired anymore. It happens, but it's such a rarity. It can't be your go-to mission. And I know a lot of music schools offer like internships with other studios and possibly the opportunity to like get hired. But like when you're at one of those schools, you could literally ask around on like a tour day and be like, does this actually happen to people? Or like go on forums, go on Reddit, look around and ask around and see like what is actually the conversion rate of being an intern or being a student at a music school that lands an internship into landing an actual studio gig. Now, this is just the music world I'm talking about. I'm not going to talk about the post world because post is a whole nother ballgame, and the rules change a little bit when it goes towards post. In music, though, these are the things that you just got to be aware of. And it sucks because being an intern can be really beneficial to the right people, but more often than not, I don't know many stories, and I don't know many people who went from being interns to an assistant engineer like I did. I hear more of, I was an intern, it was an okay situation, and then I ended up having to build my own studio anyway. But I got some experience, but I mostly learned like what not to do. That's usually the internship stories I've heard. I know everyone has a different story. I don't see many where internships actually turned into anything. And there are, you just got to know what you want out of it and how to make the situation ultimately in your favor. Like you want it to benefit the mentor, the studio that's giving you a shot. But you need to think to yourself, like, let's say I'm here for 3 months and I get nothing skill-wise out of it. What is something that I can take away from this situation or this opportunity from 3 months of experience? And I don't know the answer for you. It would be a very case-by-case scenario. Like, is it a situation type thing where they allow you to use their name to like get some free NFRs for some plugins and things of that nature? Or maybe it's a situation where you're able to leverage to maybe like, get an artist rate on some gear while you're there. With their permission, you can just say, hey, I'm an intern at studio. I got some sessions coming up. Can I get an artist rate on some gear because I'm working out of this studio? And if they're a studio that's well known enough, sometimes you can arrange stuff like that. And I'll go into details on stuff like that in a further episode. But you got to figure out ways to like leverage it in your favor. And unfortunately, the era of the intern, I think, is kind of dead. I don't think it's going to be the same as what it used to be. And I think now it's going to be the era of the creative entrepreneur, solo home studio people just taking over. I really think that in the next 5 years, we're just going to, there was already an emergence of the home studio world. And I think it's going to go up at another level in the next like 5 to 10 years. I just, because of how much education and information is out there now and how accessible a lot of the pros have become and how social they've become into sharing their insights with the world, I think we're going to see a whole different breed of home studio engineer that they're not going to need internships, because it's like, why would I intern when instead of spending, 60 to 90 days in a situation that might suck, maybe I spend like a couple $100, buy a course, learn what I want from this person that's probably like the golden nuggets, and then move on with my day. Like you're essentially buying time, and if you can afford it, it's like, why go spend why go see if you need to figure out for 1 to 3 months if you're in the right situation after all, when you can just like, I'll just buy the program and get their best stuff, or I'll just subscribe to Mix with the Masters, or I'll listen to a podcast that they got featured and take notes or go into forums. Like, there's so much information out there on a lot of these producers and mixers and people we look up to that it almost makes interning kind of like an unessential, like it's almost, interning in the right situation is always going to be great, but you have to have the right mentor in the right studio backing you up to make it worth your while. If not, you're just going to be wasting your time. But again, the caveat is people are so much more accessible and willing to give their information and foresight now that it's much different than when I started. When I started, you couldn't find crap on anyone. No producers or mixers were talking in forums, giving you the goods or anything. That just didn't exist. That wasn't a thing. Now I go on YouTube and I can pretty much get pinpointed and directed to the place to find the answers to anything, or ask a question somewhere and someone's going to answer or know where to direct me. It's insane how accessible information is. And I think we take it for granted. Like the information that interns used to have to struggle to get out of a producer, now producers are like, oh, I can monetize this and make money off of giving advice, or just give advice on the internet for free. And like in return, build my social platform and, use that as leverage with bands and things of that nature. There's like a whole different ecosystem to all this. And if you found this episode helpful, if you could do me a favor and share this episode with a friend or someone you know that would find this helpful, I'd really appreciate it. And if you'd like to continue this conversation or have any other conversation on anything music or gear related or anything just dorky with audio engineering, there is a Discord server that I have for Plugin Alley, and it is in the show notes. And until next time, remember, working in music sucks, but it doesn't have to. I'll see you on the next one.